section 2, but also section 4. Anything we say about section 2, I think we can also say about section 4. You're asked to write essays in both sections. Now, I suppose if I can emphasise one thing, this would be the one thing. If you want to impress an examiner, you write a good introduction to an essay. If I'm sitting there asked to mark papers and I'm marking them out of 25, what I really want to avoid is having most of my marks land around 13, the average mark. And so when I get a new paper, I'm really, really looking forward to a question that's going to somehow go lower than 13 or higher than 13. Now, when I read the introduction, I immediately form a prejudice towards that piece of writing. The introduction immediately says to me, this is likely to be 13, it's likely to be less than 13, or it's likely to be more than 13. Now, the introduction, if there is no introduction, no attempt at an introduction, then in my mind I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a poor essay, unfortunately. If there's a very good introduction, I'm thinking, this is good, it's going to be much higher, and I immediately start thinking, this is heading up towards 25. If there's a so-so introduction, it sort of doesn't help me, it leaves me around 13. But I suppose my message to anyone writing essays in an exam is that they form a very, very important function. And in fact, are the key, I think, the secret to writing good exam essays. Introduction, because an introduction needs to have a plan behind it, and it needs to come from reading the question that you've been asked. So, getting the right start with writing essays. Firstly, of course, you locate your national or international topic. Occasionally students locate the wrong topic, the one they haven't studied in class, and go wrong at that point. Ensure that you know if you're doing the German national study, or if you're doing the Cold War international study, or which one that you're doing, and find that question. Depending on how you've done your trial, you may not have come across a paper where it includes all of the topics. So make sure you're ready to see all of the topics, all of the ones that you haven't studied, and sort out the difference. Read both questions that you're presented with in your topic. So if you're doing the American National Study, for example, there'll be two questions, read both of them, and make a good internal choice there. Make sure you pick the one to do that you are going to be able to do the best with. Plan an answer. Don't pick up your pen, start writing. You must plan an answer. Everything else that follows from here comes from planning an answer. And in an exam, how long do you spend planning? 5 minutes. 5 minutes brainstorming. And then you write an introduction. Now, what's an exam introduction do? An exam introduction does 4 things. It addresses the question that you've been asked. It suggests an argument in response to the question. It suggests the plan of your essay. And finally, it's brief and simple. Now, let's have a quick look at what this means. It's so important. The example question for the German national study: assess the significance of the German army's influence in Hitler's rise to power in the period up to 1934. Suggested first sentence of a sample introduction. The influence of the German army in the period 1918 to 34 was of enormous significance in Hitler's rise to power. Now, just for a moment, how do you think that would impress the examiner? One sentence, first sentence. Is the examiner thinking straight away, this is a poor, a medium, or a good essay coming? Well, what I would suggest to you is that the examiner in their mind is already moving above the average mark of 13 just from that first sentence. Because what has the first sentence done? It's addressed the question. And how has it addressed the question? What does addressing the question mean? Well, it's saying to the examiner, I've actually read the question and I know what it's about and I'm going to answer it. And how do you give that message? You use the words from the question. So important. Notice here the key words in the question have been underlined, and they have been picked up in the first sentence of the introduction. And secondly, it suggests an argument. So in one sentence, the first sentence, the topic sentence of the introduction, you've done 2 key things: addressed the question and suggested an argument. The argument, of course, is that the role of the German army, its influence, was of enormous significance. It's not a particularly complex or difficult argument to follow up for this topic, but that's the argument that's going to give coherence to your discussion that's going to follow. Right, let's have a look at what could be the remainder of the introduction for such a question. So we've got that first sentence: the influence of the German army in the period 1918 to 34 was of enormous significance in Hitler's rise to power, and that's already got you off to a good start. The new Weimar democracy was undermined from the beginning because the army continued to exist as an anti-democratic state within the state. The election of Hindenburg as president in 1925 highlighted the army's influence. More importantly, when political instability returned in the late 1920s, Hindenburg was at the centre of a group of conservative nationalists, many of them fellow army officers, whose intrigues resulted in Hitler being appointed Chancellor in 1933. Finally, Hitler's rapid consolidation of power culminated in the army swearing a personal oath of allegiance to him in 1934. What's the examiner thinking now that they've read the first full paragraph of your essay, this introduction? Well, my suggestion is that they're deciding that this is a great essay that's going to come, that they're starting to think way above 13, that they're starting to think that this is going to be towards the top range. Why? Because look at what this introduction has done. It has addressed the question, it has suggested an argument, it's also suggested a plan, and finally it's brief and simple. What is the plan, by the way? The plan is to start from the beginning of the period and suggest that the army undermined the democracy from the beginning, that it played a critical role throughout the 20s, symbolised by the election of Hindenburg as president, that Hitler's appointment as Chancellor was a result of army intrigue behind the scenes, and that the army's oath of allegiance actually sealed Hitler's consolidation of power. Notice also with the dates that are used that the dates suggest that you are going to cover the full topic. So that would be an ideal introduction in an exam to such a question. What I'm not suggesting, by the way, is that the markers decide on the mark just from reading the introduction. You put in a good introduction, a good essay must follow. And similarly, if your introduction is a bit poor and you recover, then of course your mark will improve. But as I suppose as the major tip for performing well in the modern history paper, where you do have to write 2 full essays, writing an effective exam introduction is absolutely critical. Once you've written the introduction, you then begin to construct your argument more or less along the lines of the plan you've suggested in the introduction. And this is a paragraph plan, a paragraph recipe if you like. You make a point, and it's a major point, and that is your topic sentence for a paragraph. Then you explain that point fully, and I'd suggest here that this is something that students tend to overlook, to make a point, but then not to go a little bit further and ensure that the person reading it fully understands what that point means. Don't just leave it at one sentence, but take up the point and fully explain it. And how do we generally explain something? Well, often in history by using examples. And what I'm saying are examples here. Use examples, which might be evidence, factual detail. Well, they also might be historians' views that either further explain or support your point. And so that you've expanded on that sentence, you've explained it, and you've used examples to assist in your explanation. And then finally, you attempt to link to the next paragraph. And at the same time, you may even be able to link back to the question that's asked by using the words from the question again. In other words, with the example we've considered, you might be explaining how this point that you've expanded upon demonstrates the army's influence.